So let's go ahead and get started. I would like to introduce Councilmember Oliver Baines for welcome remarks. Councilmember Oliver L. Baines III was elected to the Fresno City Council as a District 3 representative in January 2011. Prior to his election to the City Council, he was an officer with the Fresno Police Department for over 11 years, assigned to the problem-oriented policing unit in the Southwest District. As an officer, Oliver has distinguished himself in the department and with his peers. Oliver is compassionate about the community where he lives, works, and now serves as the district representative on the City Council. While on City Council, he is focused on providing great customer service to those he serves, worked to upgrade land use policies through several planning initiatives, including the Southwest Fresno Specific Plan, which has been approved. He started the GOAL scholarship program to provide scholarships for area high school, college, and vocational school students, and has established the Valley Apprentice Connection, an employment pipeline from soft skills to pre-apprentice training, leading to real jobs for the hard to employ. And how relevant, aside from his work as a public servant, Oliver owns a solar company in West Fresno, Efficient Energy Solutions. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Wait a minute, are y'all woke? Somebody need some coffee? Good morning, welcome to Fresno. All right, fantastic. And I promise, I glanced at your schedule this morning. You have a jam-packed couple of days, so I promise not to be before you long. But mainly is because we are in budget hearings this week, and we start in just about 30 minutes. So I'm actually modulating myself. So first of all, I want to welcome you to the city of Fresno. We are so very honored to have you all here this morning and for the next couple of days. I want to say a special thank you to the Local Government Commission, whose work over the last several decades has been doing, it's really been changing California. So we really appreciate the work of the commission. It's an extremely important body, extremely important commission. I am now a commissioner, apparently. Kate, who is very persuasive, talked me into it, and so I'm happy to be on board. So when I was thinking about what I was going to chat with you briefly about this morning, it dawned on me as I was looking at the name of the title of the conference, Bridging the Gap, and how relevant that is in today's state of affairs with climate change. And I probably should start by saying something that we know, but not a lot. It seems like not a lot of other people know that climate change is real. It sounds funny that we have to make that statement, but I think we do, and I think we need to keep making that statement. This is a very important discussion that we're having over the next couple of days. It is strangely relevant in America right now, given where our government has positioned us in the worldwide discussion on climate change. So what that means for us here, what that means for Californians, is I think about, we're talking about bridging the gap here as the conference title this week, but I think it may go beyond that. I think we may need to stand in the gap for America, and that gap may be us here in California that will be leading the entire charge for our country. And never has it been more relevant than now to do that, to make sure that we are pushing back, letting the entire country and the world know where America truly stands on climate change, despite some of the discussions that have been misleading from our federal government. So I welcome you here today. It's not a somber message, but I think that we have a heavy lift, and I think that this type of work needs to be taken very seriously. We want to have a good time. We want to make sure that we learn a lot, but when we walk away from here, all of us should feel inspired to do more because we have to. This is an extremely important time in America's history, and the Local Government Commission, California, are going to be the ones that are leading the charge, making sure we don't lose any ground. We cannot afford to lose a single yard in this game. So with that, thank you so much for asking me to bring a welcome to you. I am excited about the work that we're doing. I'm happy to be a part of the commission, and I challenge you and urge you to make sure that we take it a step further than bridging the gap, but we now need to stand in the gap and make sure we don't lose any ground. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Councilmember, especially for being with us today. Again, like you said, he has to head off to a budget meeting in half an hour, so really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And next up, we'll have Kimberly Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez currently manages the Community and Government Energy Assistance Organization at Southern California Edison. This is an expansion on her previous role overseeing the public sector portfolio. In this new role, she still provides oversight for all local government and institutional partnerships, while now adding the income-qualified programs such as California Alternate Rates for Energy Program, Kern, and the Energy Savings Assistance Program. During her 18 years at Edison, she has held several positions in human resources, audit services, and demand-side management. In 2015, she completed the Leadership Development Program offered by the Western Energy Institute, representing Edison among over 50 utility and energy companies. Thanks so much for being with us here today.
Welcome everyone and good morning. It's really exciting to see so many people here. Last year was my first time at the seat and I was brand new to the local government arena. And I was probably a little deer in headlights, but now I've been with you a little over a year and I just couldn't be prouder to be part of this community and all the great work that you all do. So thank you for taking me in and teaching me what you do and helping me understand the importance of local government partnerships. I know many of you traveled a long distance to come here to beautiful Fresno, and that really shows your dedication to the work that you do in energy efficiency and sustainability. So I appreciate that. As you know, California has many very aggressive goals. And we see that in legislation such as AB 32, SB 32, and it's really a focus for the local government and the public sector to really play a key role in achieving the state's goals. And we saw the importance of that demonstrated through the recent CPUC business plan application, where they focused for the first time on the public sector as its own sector, and its own chapter within the business plan. It really points out to us the unique value that the public sector brings to California meeting its goals, and also highlights the challenges that are imposed on this particular sector and the focus that's needed here. And although this is the first time that the Commission is focused on the public sector, it is not new to the IOUs or the NGOs that you partner with. We've been in partnership with the local government for over a decade. And so we know the importance, and we know the value that this society brings to the state. Our partnerships have been offering technical assistance and incentives so that local governments can not only see energy savings within their own facilities, but also demonstrate leadership within their communities. We've partnered with the local government partners on education and messaging into the community so that we can help educate their small business owners, their residents, to also save energy and ultimately save money. Also, we've focused on the California long-term strategic plan efforts and helped the local governments do such things as action planning and execution on those plans, as well as think about innovative solutions that they can put into their own policies and efforts to, again, provide that leadership in the community. So this collaborative has done amazing things over the past decade, and we hope to continue the successful relationship going forward. One area that I did want to touch on today and kind of give you some food for thought for the next few days is an area that's becoming increasingly important and a big focus for the state and the commission, and that is the disadvantaged communities area. And I think this is an area where our partnerships can really add a lot of value. I think this is the next big area that we can partner on and make some really incredible impacts. If you are aware of disadvantaged communities, or what's being called DACs, you've seen it in elements across several pieces of legislation. SB 350, AB 793. You've also seen it in proceedings such as the San Joaquin Valley OIR. This is starting to be a focus in many different areas. Commissioner Guzman Cedes has a strong focus in the San Joaquin Valley area, looking at residents that don't have access to gas, such things like that. So there's a huge focus. And although disadvantaged communities are primarily areas that have moderate to severe pollution, there's also an element of low income in there that we can really help our communities get to those hard to reach folks and get them involved. If you look at the Cal EPA, the Cal Enviro screen, that's where you can kind of see across the state where the disadvantaged communities lie. And if you look at that, today we're actually sitting in a disadvantaged community. So this is an area of focus as well. I bring this to you because I believe this is the next big area, as I mentioned, where we can really partner and make an impact. And there's no really specific action for you today. It's just something I want you to think about and maybe discuss over the next couple of days around ideas of where we can all partner. Such things as community solar, clean transportation, things like that that really can help those communities going forward. So I know we're looking at a number of pilot areas. We're working closely with you and San Joaquin, looking at pilots with entities such as Valley Cam, where we can bring in EV cars, or at least do maintenance on cars to make them more efficient and more less pollutant. So things like that. So just think about that over the next couple of days. Maybe have some discussion. If you have ideas, please come see myself or any of the other folks from the IOUs or even LDC. But with that, I just wanted to thank you all for coming today and hope you enjoy your time here.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. I was hoping that during the welcoming, when I first came up, that would be the end of me highlighting any mistakes I made. Made another mistake. Kimberly is with Southern California Edison. I really apologize. Once again, making PowerPoint presentations late at night is not the best idea. Before I introduce Kate and ask her to come up, I did want to give our new statewide local government energy efficiency best practices coordinator. Yes, the title is still the same. It's still very long. Carrie Garcia, who's also a Fresno native, to come up and introduce himself and provide a few brief remarks. So again, he became the coordinator on January 2017, and prior to joining Local Government Commission as the coordinator, Carrie worked for the California Energy Commission, focusing on demand forecasting and systems planning. In addition, he has worked for the Children and Families First Commission, First Five, and the Fresno County Economic Opportunities Commission under their Community Development Financial Institution. He has a BA in Economics from CSU Fresno and an MA in Economics from CSU Sacramento with a focus on regional economics.
Good morning, everyone. Is there any Fresno State graduates? Any other Fresno? Oh, awesome. Yes. Bulldogs. Garrett Carr, right? I'm so glad that happened. Well, thank you. I'm just really appreciative of actually having this opportunity to be the best practice coordinator. I talked to all the coordinators, Joseph Oldman, Jordan Decker, and I went all the way back to Pat Stoner. He's lost somewhere in Arizona, and he's not paying attention to California, which I think is probably a good idea for right now. There's a lot going on, so we'll figure that out, but it's a good thing. But I'm trying to, take all those coordinators, especially with Pat, what Pat did previously, and I think he really started, the path of the coordinator, and he saw the value of having, this person that can be central and can hear the stories of what everybody's doing and all the great work, and I think it's just amazing. The past 6 months have been so great. Everybody's been so friendly and so welcoming, just inviting me. I feel like I'm being invited into your home practically. I'm getting to travel across the state. I've been down to San Diego, Santa Barbara, the Bay Area. I'm going to be doing now in the Central Valley finally, returning home, but it's just been really wonderful, and I hope to continue on, and I'll be sticking around for the long haul, I hope. So just really great things, and I'm glad, Oliver, I haven't been, I've probably left Fresno probably about 7 years now. I've been up in Sacramento, but it wasn't always that way when people were thinking about climate change and thinking about, the issues around your community and what that really means. Being resilient, being adaptable, building that resilience in your community, those are really goals that anybody can apply. I don't see why anybody doesn't want that for their community. You want to be able to, weather those storms, whether it be climate, economic, social, political. You really want to find that middle way, and I think we're on board to do that. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen for California and for Central Valley and all the other communities out there. So that's all I'll say.
Thanks so much, Carrie. I see that there are a handful of folks standing in the back. Could definitely be by choice. I know sitting for long periods is tough, but there are a ton of seats up front if you did want to take a seat. And next, last but certainly not least, I want to introduce Kate Meis for welcoming remarks, and she'll also be our moderator for our opening plenary session on the path to 2030. Kate Meis has been a leader at the Local Government Commission for the last decade and has served as executive director since 2013. The LGC is a nonprofit supporting local policymakers through nationally recognized events, low-cost technical assistance, and policy guidance on climate change, energy, water, and community design. Kate oversaw the launch of many of LGC's pioneering programs, including the Statewide Energy Efficiency Collaborative, as well as the California Adaptation Forum, Civic Spark AmeriCorps program, the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation, or ARCA. She's a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum and has been recognized for her climate change work by the Chronicle of Philanthropy as one of the nation's 40 under 40 young leaders who are solving the problems of today and tomorrow. Thanks so much, Kate.
Good morning. Good morning. You're still awake. Good. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here on the 8th Annual Forum. I have been to all the forums, and it's great to see the group evolve and the conference evolve, and Julia's done a great job with the team, despite all her self-deprecating remarks. She's doing fabulous. So I hope that's not my phone. So the conference theme, as has been mentioned already, is bridging the divides, bridging the gaps. So I want to take my time this morning to focus on the gaps that I see are really preventing us from achieving climate resiliency and could really get in the way between us meeting our climate and energy goals. And starting with an important one, our current federal leadership gap. As we're all aware, at this point, we have a serious gap in a number of issues related to our federal leadership, but most importantly, for the purposes of this conference, is the gap in our leadership around climate change and energy. And I'm sure everyone has been following the news around the Perez agreement, but just to underline how devastating this really is, really new lows in our international leadership on climate and energy. We have 194 parties that over years were able to establish and painstakingly orchestrate an agreement that brought all these diverse parties to the table, and then to have the United States pull out and be in the company of only Syria and Nicaragua really isn't the type of leadership that we normally can pride ourselves in. And you have to ask to what end. The increasing focus on defense is coming at a cost to funding to state agencies and to important federal agencies as well, like the Environmental Protection Agency. And those drastic cuts aren't able to go a long way in funding our other federal priorities. So EPA represents 1% of the federal budget. So when you look at the White House budget proposal, and you see that we have the proposed elimination of EPA's Environmental Justice Program, major cuts to the Superfund program, cuts to programs that would fund water and air pollution prevention, that money isn't going very far when it comes to defense. We also have major cuts proposed to the Department of Energy. a proposed elimination of 69% of research funding for energy efficiency and renewable energy. There are also proposed cuts to the loan program that spurs private investment in clean technology. So this is really putting us years behind at a time when we need to be rapidly advancing. But we know that we're still in, right? We've had a great history of subnational leadership in this country, and that continues. We had over 1,000 U.S. governors, mayors, investors, and universities sign on to say they're still into the Paris Agreement. And this is just one of a number of agreements. Governor Brown has been a part of the Under 2 MOU that a number of parties have signed onto. We had 211 climate mayors stand up and say that they're going to continue to meet the Paris Agreement. We had a new alliance form of 9 governors, so bipartisan agreement to continue the Paris Accords. And we've seen this across, Fortune 500 businesses signing on. So there is still a tremendous amount of momentum, and America will still lead, but it will be at the subnational level. And we know California has our own ambitious goals. We know that we will continue to stay on track to meet the climate agreement, and that we also have goals that are more ambitious than the Clean Power Plan, which is also under attack. The next major gap that I want to highlight is our affordable housing gap, because that is going to be critical and a major factor in our ability to meet our climate goals. The Department of Housing and Community Development projects that we need 180,000 new units built annually. Over the last 10 years, we've been building 80,000. So we have a crisis that we're all aware of, and the longer that continues, that we're building less housing than we need, 100,000 units per year less, we're just going to get further and further into that gap. And it's having major implications. So they project that by 2025, we need 1.8 million homes. So that's a huge number. And it's resulting in a lack of affordability for residents across California. So what this shows is that every metropolitan statistical area is suffering from a lack of affordable housing. An average of 50% of California households can't afford housing. Every metropolitan area is at least 30%. Some it's as high as 60% in San Francisco and LA. And so what we're seeing is that home ownership numbers have dropped to an all-time low since 1940. So right now we only have a 54% rate of home ownership. So when we think about our energy solutions, what does that do when we have people that may or may not be able to afford to make changes and may or may not have control over the decisions they're making because they don't own their homes? We're also seeing that seems like we had challenges with this last year as well. Oh, it got better. All right. Well, okay. I'll start over. No, I'm just kidding. So this shows counties across California. If you see in the blue, that's housing, and people are spending on average more than 30%, more than a third of their income on housing. So that's the projected number that we anticipate people should be able to spend. And so what's happening is more and more people are having to drive till they qualify. They're having to house themselves further and further out, which means more vehicle miles traveled, more greenhouse gas emissions, and a larger percent of their income spent on those two items, housing and transportation. And this is particularly hitting rural areas hard. If you look at Humboldt and Del Norte counties, on average, their residents are spending more than 70% of their income just on housing and transportation. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for other expenses, let alone for considering resiliency and deep energy retrofits and other measures that could help them in the long term, but they don't have any income to spare at this point. And this is meaning that people are leaving California. So what this map shows is in blue, those are the states where there are some, few people moving to California, low numbers of people moving from those states to California. But the orange, on the orange spectrum and the red, those are low-income households moving out of California to Texas, to Arizona, to Nevada in search for affordable housing. So there are a number of things that we can do to address this. At the state level, we've had an unprecedented number of bills that have been moving forward, so we are certainly hopeful that there will be a state response. But there are a number of things that we can do at the local level as well. And this came from a great study by the Bay Area Economic Council. If you haven't seen it, take a look. They looked at a number of actual policies that have been proposed to address affordable housing in the Bay Area, and they ranked them in terms of effectiveness to get more units in development. And they actually, there's another slide that shows the policies that actually had a detrimental impact on affordable housing, actual policies that had been proposed. So we see that looking at ways to expedite major developments, looking at easing building code restrictions, looking at streamlining, making it easier to do alternative units, all these things can contribute to getting more units on the market. And we should also be thinking about energy efficiency as a way to make housing more affordable generally. Low-income households spend 7.2% of their income on utilities, which is 3 times higher than what higher income households pay. And we know that if we were able to lift housing stock to an average efficiency levels, that we would eliminate 35% of that energy burden. So that's another way to address these affordability issues. The next divide I want to touch on is California's technology divide. So technology is really going to be critical to building resiliency in the future, and we know that we don't all have equal access to that technology. One of the critical factors is access to high-speed internet and to broadband. Even in California, home of Silicon Valley, known as being ahead of technological advances, 30% of Californians don't have high-speed internet access or a computer at home. So this is huge. I mean, this is a huge problem in California. It's even higher in rural areas. 57% of people in rural areas don't have access to computers at home. They may have access on their smartphones. And we also see that there's a divide in access across races and across educational attainment as well. So as we think about moving forward and the possibility that technology opens up in terms of smart grid and smart buildings and telecommuting and telehealth, we have people that do not have access and won't have access to these advances if we don't address these things now. Another major factor related to technology is growing automation. We're hearing a lot more about this recently. So if we look at automated vehicles, there are 30 companies, probably more now, across the globe that are working on autonomous vehicle technology. Their most optimistic predictions say that in 3 to 5 years, there will be fully autonomous vehicles in regular use on the road. How many of your communities are prepared for that? I mean, this is a very short window, and we may not see the most optimistic prediction, right? But if it's 10 years, I still don't think we're ready. And in my mind, we have a smart growth window in that time where these vehicles are so cost prohibitive that we can incentivize electric, shared use, fleet type models. But if we don't get the policy levers and the incentives right, we could end up in a situation where we're inducing demand, where it's more convenient to travel and people are living further and further from where they work and can, have a car that takes them and they read the newspaper or work on their laptop. So this could go a couple different ways, and we really want to make sure that we're funneling this technology in a way that supports our climate resiliency goals as well. Beyond the impact, potential impact to our communities and how disruptive this will be to the way we think about community design and transportation is the economic impact. So a lot of sales tax revenue at the state and the local level comes from traffic fees, comes from auto sales and parking revenue. So that, 40% actually. So that could be a huge hit to local government coffers. The other big impact that we need to be thinking more and more about is jobs. So there's a projected 4 million jobs at risk with a rapid transition to autonomous vehicles. 77% of those are related to truck drivers and to delivery vehicles. I was astonished to hear that truck driving is the #1 job in 30 states. So this is a big deal. And these are blue-collar workers, and we need to be thinking about a just transition for this workforce. The other impact we've seen is growing automation in retail. So we've all probably seen the self-checkout at the grocery stores. How many of you are Amazon Prime members? That's about right. So in the United States, 50% of households are Amazon Prime members. And that is already having an impact on retail. And that's without automation, that's without drones or driverless vehicles, right? And so if you think about the driver side of that, it's even further. So the retail sector lost approximately 30,000 jobs just in March. And I'm sure I'm hearing all the time on the radio about businesses foreclosing and going into bankruptcy, and I think we're going to see more and more of that as we move forward. And so we need to be thinking about the impacts of that on our communities. And one of those, again, is jobs. So cashiers and retail salespeople are the 2 largest job categories, combined representing 8 million jobs. So you take that 8 million, you take the 4 million from the autonomous vehicles from the driver's side, and we're talking about major disruption. And again, we need to be thinking about what is the just transition for that workforce. Retail sales tax comprises 12% of what local governments collect. So again, we're talking about a hit to our local government coffers as well. And we don't have a lot of evidence on this yet, the impact on congestion, but we are already seeing a huge increase in the number of deliveries related to e-commerce. So it will be interesting to see how that impacts our communities and our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals as well. I know that I'm guilty of, I think of something I want to order, I hit Prime, order it now. I'm not thinking of the way I used to about, okay, I only want to go to Target once this month, so I'm going to get a list going, I'm going to go once and I'm going to get all my stuff. So what is the impact of ordering things one at a time and having those things come? I mean, I think we'll see more and more evidence of that moving forward. Underlining all of these issues, and it's been discussed already some today, is the racial divide. We know that because of institutional racism over decades that we don't have equal access to opportunity. We don't have equal access to safe, affordable housing. We don't have equal access to well-paying jobs and to high-performing schools. And if we don't address this in a serious way, and if we are not thinking about this as we come up with every other climate and energy solution, we aren't going to be resilient as communities, and we are not going to be resilient as a state. And the good news is that there is a growing recognition of this fact at the state level and through a number of our investment programs. So we've seen great models, like this one in Woodland, a zero net energy affordable housing building for farm worker families. We've seen urban greening plantings across the state. This happens to be from a highly polluted corridor in Oakland that is in the middle of a disadvantaged neighborhood. Grid Alternatives and other programs like that are doing a great job at providing solar on low-income households, reducing energy costs for these residents, and also creating jobs as well. And in the San Joaquin Valley, we've seen programs that incentivize a transition for low-income drivers to cleaner cars. They also provide vouchers for transit and for shared mobility options. So there are solutions out there, and I think we need to see more solutions like this. And in fact, the San Joaquin Valley alone has seen $13.4 billion in economic activity from California's climate and energy programs. So that includes cap and trade, the renewable portfolio standard, and local government energy programs. They've seen a total of 100,000 jobs created from those three programs combined. So we are seeing that these programs can be very, very economically viable and environmentally sustainable for disadvantaged communities and regions like San Joaquin Valley. And if you haven't seen this Next 10 study, I suggest checking it out because it has some really great stats on how these programs have made a big difference. So in closing, I want to second Councilmember Bain's call that we do need to stand in the gap right now. California is the 6th largest economy, and the world is looking to us for leadership. And we can't lead if we don't address the gaps that we already have in our state as we think about moving into the future, staying at the cutting edge. In order to be resilient, we will need to anticipate these disruptive forces that I've laid out, and we'll need to come up with really solutions that illustrate a whole new level of creativity. We need to illustrate that we can be thinking at a systems level, and that we can come up with integrated solutions that break down traditional silos. And I think I'm very excited to introduce our next panel because they have some great, they're a great example of breaking down those silos. So thank you, and at this point I will phase on to our next portion. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Randall Winston. He is the Executive Director of the Strategic Growth Council, which I think is a great example of an agency that is working across a number of agencies, across a number of sectors, and a great example of integrated thinking. It's a state agency that brings together multiple agencies and departments to support sustainable communities, emphasizing strong economies, social equity, and environmental stewardship.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that introduction and for really great opening remarks there, and for the Commission for inviting me here today and again at the conference last year. And couldn't agree more with remarks that you heard from a number of our opening speakers about now being a really pivotal time in our state and our nation's history. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity, or set of opportunities alongside the challenges that you just outlined. I want to spend a moment here talking about a few things. So first, our state's leadership. You've heard it a number of times in a number of ways from folks who spoke earlier, and I want to emphasize a few more points. I'm going to drill down a little bit further on the set of opportunities that we see through our state's climate investments and the suite of programs that we are rolling out to accelerate greenhouse gas reduction and achieve some of the co-benefits that we need to achieve. And I'm going to do so both through programs at the community level and highlighting programs at the residential level, and then a new program that we've been developing over the past year that gets at directly some of our challenges with regard to better integrating how we deploy our investments, focusing on the most disadvantaged communities, and doing so in a local, place-based, and community-driven fashion. So with that, I'm just going to cycle on. Here we go. So Randall Winston with the Strategic Growth Council, as Kate mentioned, I'm going to cycle here quickly through California's leadership, because you heard a lot about this earlier on. AB 32 and SB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, we set a new target last fall of reducing emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. That's coupled with a couple of other key and ambitious targets for 2030. bringing to 50% the amount of renewable energy in our state's energy portfolio, doubling the amount of energy efficiency. Our climate investments funded by cap and trade, and I should just emphasize that there is no system like cap and trade, quite like cap and trade, and certainly not as successful as cap and trade in the world right now. And coupled with our ambitious climate targets, it really is unprecedented, because I think California is in a place to lead. With our climate investments, I do want to mention an item that Kim, you touched upon it earlier. Statutorily, we are required to ensure that those investments benefit disadvantaged communities. 25%, and then now again passed last fall, an emphasis on not just disadvantaged communities, but also low-income communities. That is unique. So not only is it something that we feel or think is a good idea, we are required to, and we are accelerating how we do so. And then what's happening at the federal, the national, and of course the international level. Again, you heard it earlier, but I want to emphasize some actions that were taken immediately after the United States pulled out of the climate agreement. It was that same day, a couple of weeks ago, that Governor Brown, along with a host of other governors, announced the formation of the U.S. Climate Alliance. It's now actually up to 13 states. That alliance will act as a forum to share best practices in our climate programs and remain committed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement and actually commit to new programs. So the governor anticipates increasing the membership to that in that alliance and using it as a way to ensure that we at least do our part to meet our commitments to the Paris Agreement. Internationally, we talked about bridging this gap. As the 6th largest economy, we really are in a position actually to, we think, play a role on the global stage. Also, shortly after the Paris Agreement, a couple days later, Governor Brown traveled to China. The backdrop image there is actually a meeting last week that the governor had with the president of China. The Under 2 MOU that Kate mentioned earlier is now up to 170 states, cities, and jurisdictions. A couple of Chinese provinces were added to that agreement during the trade mission that took place throughout last week. And just yesterday, the governor was appointed special advisor for states and regions for the 23rd Conference of Parties. He was appointed so by the president of that Conference of Parties, who's the Prime Minister of Fiji. We're leading. That's the point of all of that. At the federal level, I know there are challenges, but California can and must lead, and we certainly need all of you in that effort. I want to move here to drill down a little bit further, again, on our state's climate investments and talking about our efforts to accelerate greenhouse gas reductions. So again, these are funded by cap and trade. The 3 kind of primary goals here of our climate investments: reduce greenhouse gas emissions, direct investment towards the most disadvantaged communities in our state, and of course maximize economic, environmental, public, and public health benefits. And to put into context again the challenges that Kate mentioned in housing, jobs, automation, and really the opportunities that we see through these investments, it will take nothing less than a transformation of our state's economy and most of the sectors in our economy if we are to meet our climate goals. The investments created by cap and trade, albeit not a huge sum of money, we nonetheless view as catalytic in making that transition and transformation. And I want to share with you all of these opportunities, so you all are very much a part of it. Over 14 different state agencies and departments administer programs across our climate investments. $1.72 billion have been awarded to projects to date. As the Strategic Growth Council, we focus in on investments in affordable housing, transit, land conservation and protection, and again a new program that I'll speak about in a bit more detail later on. This very sort of detailed and complicated chart lays out the various programs that we have funded this year, as well as the amounts. I'll just mention kind of the categories which mirror our investment strategy with regard to meeting our climate goals. So besides our continuously appropriated programs, which does include affordable housing, high-speed rail, low-carbon transportation, and other transportation investments, we have programs associated with the governor's move to reduce petroleum use by 50%, local climate action, including transformative climate communities and technical assistance, reduction of short-lived climate pollutants, safeguarding California, a set of programs in Safeguarding California, really refers to our state's adaptation efforts, both in terms of our water action plan, as well as sequestering carbon. And then finally there, and I cut off slightly at the bottom, but our energy efficiency and renewable energy programs. So we have a suite of efforts that we are deploying now and looking to bolster in the years ahead. One way to think about these programs, and I mentioned this at the top, is sort of at the community scale and then at the residential scale. So at the community scale, I mentioned transit-oriented affordable housing. We are in our third year of investments for though that program is called Affordable Housing in Sustainable Communities. We have about $160 million that we'll announce a round for a little bit later in the year. This is a focus on not just affordable housing or just transit, but both of them together. So substantial investments in transit and transportation as well as affordable housing, focused in on low-income and disadvantaged communities. And over 80% of those funds have been invested, in low-income and disadvantaged communities. Active transportation. This is investments in complete streets, including bike lanes, improved pedestrian paths, and other ways to increase mobility options and in turn reduce vehicle miles traveled. $100 million more was added to that program through the passage of SB1 here just recently. Transit and connectivity projects led by our Caltrans, state transportation agency, including transit and intercity rail, low carbon transportation, urban forestry and urban greening. Very exciting set of investments, including green infrastructure, prioritizing natural infrastructure solutions, including parks, trees, and stormwater management. So these suite of investments, again, at the community level, are available now and rolling out now. I'll talk a little bit about residential programs before moving into how we're thinking about integrating these programs. So through our Community Services and Development Department, our weatherization and solar programs, including low-income weatherization, energy efficiency improvements, and then new this year, a community solar pilot, again, looking to focus in on low-income and disadvantaged communities. We have our clean vehicle suite of programs, including rebates for clean cars, trucks, buses, and ride sharing. And finally, wood smoke reduction, incentives to replace wood-burning stoves and devices to, in turn, reduce air pollutants. So we have a suite of programs. They're administered by different agencies, and we understand that this is can be, maybe from the community or local government perspective, sometimes a bit confusing, or if not confusing, time-consuming. In terms of going to each different department and agency, inquiring about a different set of guidelines, a different timeline, a different way of thinking through how to calculate greenhouse gas emissions and thereby reducing those emissions. And so we at the state have been thinking about, for the past couple of years now, how we can better both integrate our programs at the state level and in turn, at the community level, make it easier to more holistically think through and deploy investments to not just accelerate greenhouse gas reduction, but achieve the host of co-benefits in terms of our economy, social equity, our environmental stewardship that we know we need to achieve. last year, the governor also signed AB 2722. It's a law that established transformative climate communities to be administered by the Strategic Growth Council. And this program looks to do just that. $140 million focused in on the investing in the most disadvantaged parts of the state. You heard about Cal Environmental Screen earlier. About 20 indicators used to identify communities most impacted by pollution and socioeconomic burden. This program will invest in the top 5%, so the most disadvantaged parts of the state. $70 million right here in Fresno, $35 million in Los Angeles, $35 million in the third location to be determined. And not spreading those investments out, but concentrating them at the neighborhood scale. A place-based approach means allowing communities or applicants to determine which of our set of climate investments they would want to invest to transform their community. And do so in a way that integrates climate strategies. The state is looking to be a partner with whatever recipients will be awarded those funds, and a partner both in terms of funding technical assistance through third parties and working with those communities hand in hand over multiple years to ensure that those investments are deployed and whatever strategies are pursued, that they are integrated. Collaborative partnerships, this means multiple parties, so community-based organizations, local governments, teams of entities that can leverage other investments and do so in a way that is truly based in the community. We're requiring actually the formation of a memorandum of understanding with all the parties and transparent decision-making process with regard to project selection and deployment. And it will include both implementation grants, so of that $140 million, which I mentioned earlier, and then planning grants. So for future years, we can make sure the communities are prepared to apply. So we've got a tremendous set of opportunities before us in light of our challenges, and we're excited to work with you all. So thank you.
Thanks, Randall. How excited are you to live in California? Yeah. Love you. So up next, I should say first, so we're going to do a facilitated Q&A session with all the speakers after Supervisor Perez and Mindy speak. So there are cards at each of the tables, so if you have questions for any of the speakers, please write those down. Staff will bring those up to me and I'll include them in the Q&A that we do later. So at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Kern County Supervisor Leticia Perez. Leticia is second Vice President of the California Association of Counties and serves as the chair of the Latino and Latina Caucus of California Counties. She is Governor Brown's appointed member of the Board of State and Community Corrections and co-chairs the Executive Steering Committee overseeing the Prop 47 grants. And most importantly, is a board member of the Local Government Commission. So thanks for being here, Leticia.
Okay, sorry, no PowerPoint. I am not really a millennial. I pretend sometimes. But I think in this crowd I would get rid of much pretense. So, thank you for your attention and the opportunity to be here with you. Energy discovery and management is a proud and unparalleled tradition for Kern County. In 1899, the Kern River field started modern oil exploration. Today we produce over 75% of California's in-state oil and 60% of the state's natural gas. Our new and unprecedented $18 million environmental impact report and permitting system ensures the most environmentally protective oil production anywhere in the state of California and arguably the country. In Kern County, we pride ourselves in being the energy epicenter of southwestern United States. And it is not, of course, just limited to fossil fuels. In 1981, the first ever wind production in California was in Kern County. And now we have the largest wind area in all of California. Combined with our solar rooftop, distributed generation for commercial and industrial businesses, and large-scale solar, we have in Kern County over 12,000 megawatts of renewable energy. That is more than the entire state of Texas. One little county in California, we are one of 58, and more than the entire state of Texas. We, of course, serve almost every city in Southern California onto the California grid. Energy development is a focused industry for us, and the employment story is a huge reason why. Since 2009, the development of wind and solar has produced over 8,000 construction jobs in Kern County. 8,000 within our renewable sector. Most of that has been with 75 to 80% local hiring. That is huge. Our training programs have moved low-income youth, returning veterans, laid-off oil field workers, all into the workforce for potential long-term careers. Wind turbine technicians and solar installers earn an average of $21 an hour with a high school diploma and certificate training programs. As a former public defender, it is the one field where I can refer any former client, and where they pass a drug test, 100% of my referrals have been hired at $21 an hour. In a community with the country's second highest rate of youth disconnection, that means young people between 16 and 24 that are neither in school or employed. We have the second highest rate in the United States of America. In our community, we find ourselves quite desperate and eager to close the skills gap, put our people to work, and be creative about local initiatives that actually make that happen in real time. While we are providing the land and absorbing the impacts of hosting these large-scale projects, we are not receiving all of the benefits we should from cap and trade and GHG reduction funding. Our local businesses pay into these funds significantly, but the grants, as you know here in the Central Valley, often go to Northern and Southern California population centers, even as the County of Los Angeles bans wind production. So we are creating our own Kern County sources of funding through the mandated mitigation on our development projects for air quality impacts and greenhouse gases in partnership with the San Joaquin Valley Air District. For our enhanced permitting process for oil, we signed the first emission reduction agreement between the county and the Air District to collect air impact fees on new oil production and to use that for projects to clean up the air. In the first year of permitting, we have generated $4 million for Kern County. The only place in California where oil is paying for its impacts on air quality. Our region must look at locally sourced, locally managed programs to benefit our communities and put people to work today. Renewable energy, while it does raise electricity rates, puts our people to work locally, and it makes it a package that we can support. Kern County has had a community-wide greenhouse gas inventory done by the SJV APCD since 2012, and it has provided the baseline information that we needed to see how we're doing. And we have instituted retrofitting of municipal buildings, fleet upgrades, and solar on some of our buildings. We are now formulating plans for more solar on our county buildings. But as always, it is the source of the funds to do that project that must be identified and must pencil out. Climate change is an ever-increasing, critical, and important issue. But local governments cannot cut libraries, parks, and firefighters to fund that fund. In closing, please allow me to brag that Kern County, once again, gentle reminder, is more than half of the renewable energy produced in the great state of California. We are more than half. more than 50%. One of 58 counties, but more than half of the renewable energy portfolio for this great state. I look forward, of course, to learning how others are successfully competing for funds and creating programs that support our communities while also supporting the state's ambitious, internationally renowned, and quite noble goals. Thank you. Head back to my seat.
Yeah, you can come back to your seat, and then we'll bring you back up after Mindy. So thank you, Leticia. And again, if you have any questions, please make sure that you're writing those down and have those prepared. So up next, we have Mindy Romero, who is the founder and director of the UC Davis California Civic Engagement Project. Romero is a political sociologist and holds a BA in political science and sociology, as well as an MA and PhD in sociology from UC Davis. Her research focuses on political behavior, race, and ethnicity, and seeks to explain patterns of political underrepresentation. So a very important topic and very timely. So thank you, Mindy, for being here.
Okay. How's everyone doing so far this morning? Good? Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm double mic'd, but that doesn't guarantee anything. So hopefully my PowerPoint is next. There we go. So I'm going to talk to you today about the importance of civic engagement, and probably first I should define civic engagement. So for our purposes today, it's very broadly defined. So it's any effort by an individual or group to improve the quality of life in their community, as they define it. That includes, under that very broad umbrella, things like political engagement, electoral engagement, voting, public engagement, as many of you think of, right, engaging with your public entities to give input and petition, right, and seek resources and those sorts of things. So it's very broad, joining boards and commissions, that sort of thing. Today I'm going to talk to you about some patterns of engagement, as the data allow us to talk about. The impact of demographic shifts throughout California. We've gone through some tremendous demographic shifts over the last few decades, and we will be going through more over the next few decades to 2030 and beyond. And then in light of the patterns of engagement and the demographic shifts, what does that mean for our civic landscape? What does that mean for all of you in terms of your work? Where do we go from there? So, first though, I want to open by asking all of you a question. I know this is a big room, so you can shout at me, it's totally fine. Are you seeing an increase in civic engagement in your communities? Say in the last 6 months or so. Yes? Yes? Yes. Okay. That was pretty simple. Okay, a lot of yeses. I would say certainly at the national level, on the national stage, right, in terms of our media and other places, we've seen a lot of discussion about this, what appears to be an increase in engagement, right? Marches, rallies, protests, new clubs, new initiatives, new movements being formed. Much of that is at least addressing the national dialogue, concerned with our president, concerned with potential actions, current and potential actions of Congress. On one side, but certainly there's also the flip side. Many folks have come together and are engaging, protests, marches, rallies, organizationally, in terms of support for the president and congressional policies, right? So we're seeing engagement, period. A lot of engagement on one side, but still engagement, period. But potentially, all of you are seeing engagement maybe at the local level, because all of this engagement is local ultimately. But how much you're actually seeing engaged with local initiatives, sounds like you are, but I would suspect that there's probably a wide variation in how much folks are actually engaging with their local agencies and local entities. So that could be a great conversation we could have maybe in the Q&A even. But period, the power of civic engagement is all around us. We are seeing that. We don't yet know the percentage, like what percent of the California public or the U.S. public is actually engaging. We see a lot of people out there doing things, but how large really is that in the bigger picture? And there will be lots of research and lots of data yet to come to show us that. But what we do know, we have lots of data to tell us typically what we know is, or know as to be the engagement patterns in our state and in our country. So let's review some of those numbers. And I'm going to focus in on voting behavior because that's the place that we have the most data. But first, engagement period, generally speaking, is low in our communities. The proportion of the community that's engaging in some way is low, and it's uneven. It's uneven geographically, right? From county to county, within a city, across neighborhoods, very much so. And it's uneven in terms of communities. So by race, ethnicity, age, educational status, income, pretty much you name it, right? We'll see disparities in participation. That being said, I'm going to show you voting data, but I want to kind of set the stage here that many of the patterns that I'm going to show you in terms of voter data are also present in other forms of engagement, right? But we'll focus in on voter data. So California voter turnout, let's talk about 2016, November election, the election that led to a lot of the engagement that we're seeing, right? Now, what was actual turnout? Well, in California, it was about 59% eligible voter turnout. And what that means is the percent of those eligible to vote, it's adult citizens, in our state that actually turned out to vote. This is actually considered a high turnout election, believe it or not. The second highest eligible voter turnout rate that we've seen in 30 years. But I would suspect that all of you might still think this is not high enough, right? We've got over 40% of our eligible population not participating in what I think, whether you liked your choices or not, and again, it wasn't just national, right, it was state and local. Whether you liked your choices or not in the election, I think many, many of us consider this election to be very consequential, right? And so over 40% not participating. Again, this is considered a high turnout election. Now let's talk about some of that variation. So hopefully you can see here, what this is a map of California by county showing the same rate, total eligible turnout, but for each county. And the darkest shade is 60 plus. Those are the counties that are outperforming the state average. You can see that along the Central Coast, Bay Area, areas of the Sierra Nevada have the highest turnout. What areas have the lowest turnout? It's the Central Valley in Southern California, a little bit in terms of the North State. And we'll return to this map in a moment. But what about group turnout? So I'm going to talk about disparities by race and ethnicity. So Latino eligible turnout. There was a lot of talk, not the only election that we've seen this, but particularly in this election last November, around what the strength of the Latino vote would be, right? Particularly given the rhetoric that was in the election, right? A lot of talk here in California, a lot of expectation around what that vote would be. Let me show you. Ready? A little dramatic pause. 46%. So not 59%, but 46%. This actually was a good year, better year for Latino eligible turnout also. But as you can see, still a very wide gap, right? About 12 percentage points in terms, a little more than that, in terms of turnout rates. Asian American eligible turnout, 41%. And I don't have slides, but to show you, just to talk quickly about youth, those aged 18 to 24, regardless of race or ethnicity, only 36% turnout. Youth of color, even lower, low-income youth, even lower, right? And we can slice it so many different ways. Now this chart, there's a lot going on. Let me just direct you, I'm just going to point out a couple of things here. To the far right are the 2016 numbers that I just gave you. So the blue column is the total eligible turnout, 59%. You see the red, Latino turnout, 46%. These data right here, these early data, don't allow us to look at turnout for white and African American. But it does allow us to subtract and look at all those non-Latino and non-Asian, the non-Latino, non-Asian population, what their turnout rate was. And in California, in our state, that's about 87% white, 68% turnout. So between non-Latino, non-Asian as a group, 68% to Latinos, 46%, right? 20 percentage points difference. And then it goes even lower, right? The gap widens even greater when we're talking about Asian American. If you look over the last, and this chart could extend back 30 years, but just to show you some elections, I just want to emphasize that story of disparity is constant. It's disparities in our turnout, underrepresentation is entrenched in our electoral system. Now, midterm elections, always lower turnout. Presidential elections, always higher turnout. Whether it's a high turnout election or a low turnout election, what is consistent, the gap will narrow a little bit, right, or widen a little bit. Usually the disparity gap is a little bit less in high turnout elections, but the gap is always pretty large and pretty consistent. Make sense? So again, disparities are entrenched. Now let's go back to this map I just showed it to you, this total turnout by county. Let me show you Asian American turnout by county, and I know you guys are from all different counties across the state. So you can see a patchwork quilt. So in Central Valley, particularly very low. And this is the same legend, same measures, same categories as the previous chart. Latino turnout, one of consistently low, not a patchwork quilt, but one of consistently low, right? Very low. You're getting into counties that are, many counties, 30 to 39% turnout, much, much lower, right, than the state average. Some counties doing a little bit better, and we end up getting 46% as an average. So there are real consequences to these disparities in turnout, and turnout disparities, period, in civic engagement. As I said, it's extending beyond just turnout. One, of course, is underrepresentation, less of a voice in your community. But we know there are community patterns, or regional, county, and community patterns. So these numbers translate into communities of color, low-income communities, having much less of a voice in their civic process, the civic landscape. And it just so happens that these communities are much more likely to also have a lot of challenges to have more social and economic outcomes. So you have less of a voice, which in and of itself is, I hope, concerning for everyone, but you also have a real connection to outcomes. Because their voices are not heard, you can make a very strong argument that in these communities of challenge, right, where we have poor social and economic outcomes, policymakers need to hear more, right, residents, hear their opinions, their needs, their desires, to get data, to get that input, right, to make good decisions. And actually, we're seeing the opposite, of less of a representation in that process. So it has real impact on outcome. That's probably my biggest takeaway from today, if we had one. Let's talk about population just real briefly. Again, I'm just going to focus here on race and ethnicity because of time. But first, so I showed you that disparities are entrenched, right? Not just, again, showing you a voter turnout, but we know this more generally in terms of civic engagement. I think there's a lot of hope for 2018, probably many of you in the room, in terms of increased engagement. Actually, regardless of your politics, I hope there's a hope for increased engagement in 2018 and 2020, right? More people participating, period. The data, though, tell us that to see significant change is a very uphill battle. So the disparities and the size of the disparities over the last 30 years don't change a whole lot. It would take a lot of work, and I hope that that does happen. It would take a lot of work to make significant changes. We could see small changes in the disparity gap, but a lot of work to make significant changes, right, to narrow that disparity gap. Does that make sense? So let's say for a moment that disparities in participation stay about the same. They're not going to stay exactly the same, but stay about the same. The other factor that's a huge player in all of this, and all the work that you do, is population shifts. So even if participation rates stay about the same, you've got a growing population of color in California, and specifically actually the Latino and Asian American population is going to be growing. And as we increase the larger proportions of the population that have historically underrepresentation, right? That means even with low participation rates, you still have a low rate, but with a bigger pie, you're going to get more participation, more sheer numbers, right? So that's an opportunity, but also that's a huge challenge because all of you, if we don't connect with all of those new folks coming into our population, and by the way, that's almost overwhelmingly by birth, not by immigration, coming into the population, we're not connecting with them, then you actually, right, could be increasing underrepresentation, having a lower overall participation rate. So just to make sure you're all awake, before you show you some population numbers, what do you think the proportion, the large driving numbers are from the Latino population, so I'll focus on that right now. What do you think the Latino population, the proportion of the total population will be in 2030? 25? 65? 60? 40? Okay, I got it all over the place. Okay, you ready? Now, there's a lot going on in this chart. It goes to 2060. So the second set of numbers, 2030, about 41%. These are projections from the California Department of Finance. If you didn't know, California right now is about 39% Latino. Whites, non-Hispanic are about 38+%. That change happened a couple of years ago, so Latinos are the most numerous population. By 2020, 39, almost 40%. 2030, 41%, and by 2060 projected at 45%. The other thing to notice here is the percent of the white non-Hispanic population as it decreases quite significantly. As Latinos increase, it decreases. And then what I want to show here for Asian Americans, because it might be a bit deceptive, the Asian American population in sheer numbers is going to be growing quite dramatically. They have large percentage increases over their own numbers. But because Latinos are so dominant in numbers, that in the proportional change story, they dominate the proportional change story. Make sense? So you see a declining proportion of Asian Americans by the time you get all the way out to 2060, but that population will be growing significantly in absolute numbers. Just want to make sure you know that. Okay. And the African American population will be staying about flat and declining in proportions. So this is population again. This is by county, so the proportion of the county total population that is Latino. In 2015, you can see that 39% that we're at right now varies tremendously across the state. And we can make all these charts available if you guys want them. By 2020, by 2030, I'm not explaining taking the time to explain the categories very well, but we're going into, the darker shade is 60+%. More, and then 2060. This is 2060. There we go. Okay. If this was of color, combining Latinos, Asian Americans, and African Americans, you'd see a lot of red, deep red, right? The darkest category is 60+. But this may look like nothing much is happening up north, but in terms of actual change, percent change, believe it or not, most of the percent change over the next several decades will be up north. Numbers are really small, very large percentages, even if you had a 200% or 100% increase. Numbers are small, still means small proportion of the population. Make sense? But a growing proportion of the population. Okay, so there will be significant changes in population shifts. There'll be growth, both opportunities and challenges, as I mentioned, in terms of reaching out to those communities, understanding where these challenges will be, the timeline of them, the magnitude, the location is really critical for outreach. And I put here citizen voting age population, but it also should say just total population. So where do we go from here? Civic engagement is more important now than ever. I think you all know that. It's always important, but particularly with the changes that could be coming ahead, as have already been outlined by Kate and others. If those changes occur, or in fighting against those changes, or wanting to have a voice in those changes, local will be so critical. And if the changes do happen, of course, at the local level, we're going to have many, many key decisions that have to be made, and those decisions will only be as good, really, as we have community input. Not just to make the decisions, but also for the community to feel like they have a voice, right, and a say in what's happening in some of these changes that can be absolutely quite devastating and scary. So, some barriers to engagement, and this list could be much longer, but I just wanted to touch on a few, even here. Often we do hear big objections to engagement from policymakers of different types. Sometimes we'll hear that in the short run there's a concern that may take longer to make decisions by including the public, maybe more expensive, there's a feel of a loss of control, and these points here from work from the Davenport Institute at Pepperdine. Great resource. What should we do? So the traditional process very often doesn't work, and I know that I'm speaking to folks here that know this. So beyond the public hearing, if it's formally a public hearing or anything that looks in design like a formal public hearing, is a greater challenge, right, to engagement. 3 minutes at the mic is not engagement. I think I'll leave it there because of time. What should you do? I'm out of mic now. Benefits of civic engagement. So more credible by getting engagement and representative engagement and robust engagement, you get buy-in. Yes, it provides cover. That's a benefit for many folks. You get faster program implementation in the long run, right? You hopefully eliminate those bumps. You understand, right, what the roadblocks will be ahead. And you also have folks that don't, at the last minute, come and say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't hear about this, and I have real concerns. It reduces the chances of blowback. You get more creative decisions, more informed residents, and the opportunity for community building goes way beyond the given topics that you're talking about, right? And lastly, what should you do? I would really encourage thinking about engagement, public engagement, as informing and empowering communities, right? It's not just to check the box, of course, but it's not just informing and getting that input, but it really is about empowering. If you come to the process thinking that you're engaging with communities to empower them, right, you're going to get much more accurate, much more effective engagement, much more better input for your decision making. That means that you have to meet communities where they're at. What are their concerns, right? Not just of this is the ABC nuts and bolts of this potential policy change, but understanding how communities may receive that. The concerns, the fears that they have, questions around motive, that's always huge. Electoral reforms, that's always huge. Why is this change being made, right? Having trusted liaisons into the community to be able to gather and understand where these concerns may be and address them. Come out and talk to them about those issues. Building trust with staff, agencies, and yes, institutions. Trust in our institutions, we have a lot of data across the country to say now that folks, period, are feeling less trust in their institutions, and particularly underrepresented communities historically have had lower levels of trust for lots and lots of good reasons. So all of this means better policies, better outcomes for communities, and of course, hopefully also more satisfying work for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. This is working yet? Can you guys hear me?
No.
No? I'll take this until AV support. So if all our speakers could come join me up on the stage. And if you have questions, go ahead and write those down and wave them around, and we'll have staff that come pick those up. So, Randall, you've got a bit of a break listening to these brilliant women speak. So I'm going to start with you. So we both talked about some of the cap and trade programs and how those have benefited communities of all types with a specific focus on disadvantaged communities. What's happening with cap and trade? Didn't see that as part of the budget that looks like we're getting close to passing. Some of the bills got stalled out. What happens with cap and trade now?
A great question, and we are at a pivotal time, and I'd say in the thick of negotiations. So you're right. Earlier this week, the governor and legislative leaders announced having come to an agreement on the state's budget, and you may have seen a quote from Governor Brown expressing his enthusiasm towards getting to a 2/3 deal to extend cap and trade. I do believe and confident that we will get there. There's been a number of issues raised about cap and trade through legislation, both in the Senate and obviously the Assembly. And so I think that all parties are discussing. The administration is certainly confident about extending cap and trade. And I'd say even just stepping back a bit from that, given the relative success of cap and trade over the past 2 years, where I think we need to go as a state and nationally, it's critically important to extend the program. And I think it's recognized that it's not perfect, and hopefully in the negotiations, some of those imperfections can be ameliorated, and we'll get to a 2/3 vote.
What's the best way? I'm assuming most of the folks in this room would agree, and the local government commission, we certainly agree that we need to extend cap and trade. A number of the programs that we all work on in this room are benefited from cap and trade funds. How can we engage to make sure we get to 2/3?
Very good question as well. The projects themselves, where those funds are going, that is certainly one way. I know we need to do more to get the funds out and to show that it is cap and trade that's funding affordable housing, transit projects, other projects. Certainly identifying and calling your elected official, your assembly member or senator, is one way to raise that concern. And when there are perceived to be problems with the investment, both in terms of where they're being deployed or the level of community engagement or how the programs themselves are administered, I think letting us state agencies know about it is also, oddly enough, a key way, I think, to raise the importance of the programs, because we want to be responsive to ensuring that the programs continue to evolve to meet the needs of those who are, in particular, most burdened by pollution and the environmental impacts that we want the investments to address.
I have a question for you, Leticia, here, and I think it's a great question. The person says they admire your achievements, as I certainly do. They want to know what has made your county unique, and what are your next level, your current challenges, and where you're going to go forward. And I want to personally add to that. You're unique in that it's a community that hasn't necessarily been a sustainability leader over the history. So how have you been able to, if not change the partisan conversation around climate change and energy, how have you been able to form a broad partnership to advance these initiatives, and what's next?
Oh, very good. Kern County is a very red county, as you know. I'm the only Democrat on my board of supervisors. So I have really sort of been forced to the table in a way that I think a lot of folks around the state have just not had the opportunity, privilege, or time to do out of necessity. So the experience for me has been one that has been very worthwhile because issues of sustainability, issues of employment, skills gap, these are very nonpartisan issues. And they relate to people on a human level. And exploring those and learning about them and how to communicate with them, with people that politically may not have a lot that we agree upon, has really been a true test of leadership in Kern County and figuring out really how to connect the dots there. So really it has been an incredible privilege. I respect and admire my colleagues. We don't always agree, but certainly given our levels of unemployment, given our levels of literacy, given our specific challenges, we have every reason to band together and be creative in a red county in a blue state. And one of the ways in which we have distinguished ourselves is by being genuinely pro-business, and not just in the knee-jerk traditional ways of railing on regulation or the taxation system, which certainly that's part of a lot of the conversation that occurs in my county. We have made a determination that we will be very aggressive in our attempts to recruit new business into our community, be welcoming, ensure that our planning department has a progressive, streamlined permitting process that is, of course, environmentally sound, but really works to promote economic development in Kern County. It is one of the reasons why, where we are 80% of the state's fossil fuel development, certainly an industry that is consistently demonized in California, good, bad, or otherwise, we have asked the industry to come to the table with us, to be partners with us, and help us identify the kinds of technologies, the kinds of processes, the kind of natural incentives that this industry has, and figure out what works for them and how can we slowly but surely, progressively, bring this industry into the fold so that we are able to utilize what is natural to them and employ those dollars, opportunities, programs to, for example, take out all of our fossil fuel buses and replace them with electric buses, for example. There really is no money in our general fund to do this. We don't have extra tens of millions of dollars sitting there. And I don't know that any county in California does have that. We certainly do not. But because of the relationship that we have with our industry, we have something to offer them, they have something to offer us, and together we are building the bridge to the future, if you will, of engaging in the projects at the local level that are actually reducing PM10, NOx in the air. We are actually mitigating for those what are clear impacts to air and water in our community. We don't deny them. We don't pretend that they're not happening. But we don't believe that we can demonize any industry and then ask them to come to the table and push our agenda. I just don't think that's reasonable or rational. And while I'd love to see things move much more quickly and advance along the scale that we could all feel really good about, what we have done there is quite remarkable. We've engaged in an environmental impact report that cost $18 million. We brought in the best and most respected environmental impact report agency out of Oakland. Lots of good environmentalists in that process that are helping us really comprehend what does progress look like in light of our unemployment issues, in light of our industry realities, and the necessity the county has to maintain a general fund that is healthy and balanced over the long term. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but that's a small effect.
So Mindy, you talked about voter turnout. This question is about the percentage of people of color in office. So the mismatch between who we have in elected office compared to who we have demographics-wise across the state. So can you speak to any work that you're doing or that other groups are doing to encourage more people of color to run for office?
Oh, and I think there might be two questions in there, right? Maybe I should talk a little bit about just what the state of engagement is for folks in public office. So generally speaking, not only are there great disparities in terms of turnout and other types of civic engagement, but yes, participating in public office, getting elected, having the resources to get elected, right? Being supported and encouraged to be elected. So across the state, we don't see, there is a difference at the legislative level in terms of leadership, which I'll talk about in a second, but across the state generally, folks of color are underrepresented, folks from low-income backgrounds, women are certainly underrepresented at all levels, right? At the legislative level, in the past couple of years, we've seen a big change in terms of Latinos represented amongst the legislative leadership. So on both sides, both on the Senate side and the Assembly side. And so that's kind of an interesting dynamic. And through those leadership positions, chairships on committees and the Latino caucus, it's a lot more Latino influence at the legislative leadership. But otherwise, if you look at that and you think, oh, things are changing in California, almost every other level of government, elected office, still greatly underrepresented. So you asked about change. What do we encourage? Oh, goodness, that's a $64,000 question. You were going to game show $64,000. I would say, first off, you have to have a pipeline. Maybe not first off, but a critical component of the pipeline. So we need to be getting folks in positions of on water boards, on school boards, not just to have hopefully representation on those important outlets, but also that those are the areas where people, particularly folks from underrepresented communities, get experience, right? Get the encouragement, get the skill set they need to be able to continue and move on to other forms of public office. I think we need to make sure that folks are resourced. Sorry, I didn't really see that in mind. I want to make sure I'm not hurting here. That folks are resourced, and this is a big thing for women, period, as well. Folks of color are much less likely than women and young people. Not at all? I can just yell. This is my opportunity to yell and oh, darn. I don't think this is working. Can you hear me now? Okay. It's working maybe somewhat. Okay. So underrepresented period, as I was saying, are not encouraged as much. Particularly young people are not as encouraged. For women, we hear often there's societal pressures, expectations of the family, right? Those sorts of things. But much more broader, just access to that skill set, to resources to be able to run for office. Underrepresented groups are much less likely to have that. Raise money, but also a whole army of folks behind you to tell you how to run for office, to think strategically, where are the best place for you to jump in, to support you every step of the way, and make you successful, not just win, but make you successful. And make you also want to stay in, Because it's a hard ride now to be an elected official, right? And it makes it harder for folks who don't have those resources or that support, and are more likely potentially to drop out and not to continue. I think I'll leave it there unless there's something more specific.
So we have a lot of questions, so we'll try and just do speed responses and get through as many of these as possible. So I'm going to direct this next one to you, Randall. In some areas, our building codes and EE codes are adding costs to housing and causing less affordability. And so I think the question that is raised, and I touched on this a little bit as well, is how do we balance these state goals? Obviously, we need to lead in all of these areas, but how do we get that balance right so we're not moving forward on one at the expense of social equity or affordability or jobs, as Supervisor Perez illustrated?
Boy, that is, I'm working, yes. That is another very, very difficult question. So I mean, one simple word is, and this is maybe not the most adequate answer, but coordinate. And as state agencies, you saw just what I showed in the slide in my presentation. We've got a host of over a dozen agencies administrating different programs with different guidelines, and at the risk of maybe establishing different policies, how they're deployed and what they look like at the community level. So it is all the more I think important and urgent that our agencies, our legislative branch, and certainly our executive branch work together as those policies are rolled out. Specifically talking about the building front and the building code, yes, we are pushing towards a much more progressive, I think, code in terms of meeting our zero energy and energy efficiency goals, and that in turn does run the risk, I think, of jumping ahead of the other concerns around affordability, certainly training and appropriately training our workforce to meet our workforce challenges and take advantage of those opportunities. And so it's going to take, I think, a doubled effort in terms of coordination, certainly investment. We've got to make sure that we have the funds available at the state level and at all levels of government, regional and local, to be able to shore up the resources in terms of training and hopefully meeting our affordability crisis. I know in turn we have a number of, and you mentioned this in your presentation, Kate, bills in discussion right now on the housing front to meet some of our challenges with regard to affordability. So we'll see how that plays out. The governor, in the budget that was released in January, did release a set of principles to hopefully help steer or guide legislative discussion with regard to creating a new source of funds for affordable housing, which I hope in turn will help to, from the economic side, meet some of our really ambitious goals and demands, at least for housing. So it'll be challenging.
Speaking of ambitious goals, Supervisor Perez, we have a question asking whether you envision a day where Kern County goes to 100% renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me? Okay. I think I'm giving you some feedback. It's such a great, ambitious, and worthwhile question. We live in a state with 39 million people, okay, and counting, right? We do not have a lot of measures in place to think about population control or to divert attention away from what are real challenges with natural resources and otherwise. With that said, in a growing, booming state of 39 million people, we have 32 million cars on the road and growing. Our electric car capacity, as it is today, is several hundred thousand. So we have a remarkable gap in where we are today and where we need to be in terms of meeting the actual real needs of a population that is growing rapidly, that is changing, that is increasingly living in poverty. We have, I think, 25% of the country's homeless population lives in California cities. So we are overrepresented in populations that really need a lot of help, a lot of skills gap closing to get to where we have sustainable populations and folks are able to meet their potential, whatever that may be. So this conversation is, to me, a tricky one because the demands of 39 million people and 32 million cars necessitate what would appear to be some still long-term use of fossil fuels. I just think that's a reality given our population, given the way we're growing, the rate at which we're growing. I am proud, so proud that we are more than half of the state's renewable energy. We have been aggressive and ambitious about being that for the state of California. Governor Brown is very appreciative of the role that we play. But there are there are aspects of the market there that are not the most authentic in terms of how the market really functions and operates. And so those components will have to be looked at and part of an energy plan as we move forward and think about the next 10, 20, 30 years. Because clean energy is very much where we want to go. Clean energy is where we should be. We should be cleaning up everything that we do and how we think about technology and its impact on human existence. And of course, this earth and its longevity. So I think these are very important conversations. We are doing more than our part, above and beyond. The fossil fuel industry, oil industry for Kern County has traditionally been 1/3 of our general fund. That's 1/3 of our public hospital. That's 1/3 of our sheriff's department. It's 1/3 of our public defender. Stuff that's very near and dear to my heart. That is the way in which this particular local economy has functioned. And that we have a great amount of dependency upon it. So it's a bit of a two-edged sword for us. We want to change. We want to make, we want to clean up our operations in every regard. But we have an entire trickle-down economy in Kern County that has been contingent upon the success of this industry. And the impacts are not ones that go away easily. In particular with a population that has a kind of skills gap that we do, literacy challenges. I think we should be as thoughtful, as pensive as we can, less knee-jerk reactions to these issues, and think very cautiously about how we transition our population from certain energy sources and dependency on natural resources. I think that's an important conversation, and I look forward to having that. LGC has been a huge motivator in pushing us and helping us understand how we meet these needs in a more sustainable fashion. So I think these matters are quite complicated.
So Mindy, we have another question about civic engagement. So you talked about a number of barriers and strategies local governments can deploy to get people more engaged. I want to hear a little more about some of those. I think in particular, a lot of cities and counties I talk to have, had a number of public processes. They have the public meetings, and I think there's a concern that there's a oversaturation of information available to everybody generally. People are getting hit with, articles, news, social media all the time. So how do local governments break through in that environment? And with potentially some public engagement burnout or fatigue, how do we engage people at the most critical times, and what are some tools and technologies to do that?
Testing, no. Can you hear me a little bit? Okay, now you can hear me. There's a lot in that question. I know we're short on time too, but I guess what I would say is, first off, if you're talking about cutting through the clutter, not everybody is getting a lot of clutter. Not everybody is getting bombarded with all kinds of messages. Generally speaking, voters and citizens and residents are information low. So all of us are probably often glued to our TVs or our phones and getting news alerts, right? Yesterday we had a series of news alerts that came over from what was happening in the Senate Intelligence hearings and the testimony. But if you talk to, particularly underrepresented communities, if you talk to the average young person, what is the average young person? But you talk to a wide range of folks that are not in public service, you'll see that folks are really, I think, very information low. And really the question more is about getting that information to them, making sure that there is a good representation of the community that hears and is informed. So I just want to state that I hear about all the time under the election umbrella, that folks sometimes have a difficult time understanding that not everybody is informed on all the ballot initiatives, right? In terms of techniques, I guess, first off, again, understanding that the typical ways that we do things really have to kind of approach the community with kind of out-of-the-box kind of engagement strategies. So as interactive as you can be, as thinking around community building, but bringing in community liaisons to be able to build trust, to be able to communicate information in ways that sometimes we don't necessarily communicate things in the most effective ways, but other folks can help us communicate in ways that actually resonate and make sense for our community. And that also means that the ways that you get input sometimes can be, instead of a meeting, right, hopefully everybody's using round tables, not square tables and things like that. I'll skip all of those kind of techniques. But maybe you have like comment boxes, around a room, and you have people, and you kind of make it kind of fun and interactive, and you have people, choose a topic or choose an issue or choose an opinion, for instance, that makes sense for them. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that you are really coming to the community with information in hand before you ever come to the community, by talking to trusted folks in the community first about how best to engage that community. Does that make sense? I feel that's a bit of a circle. Thank you. So too often we use a template, right? Either we're told to by a mandate or by a program, or we use that template because it's worked before, or we think it's worked before. But breaking outside of that, from that template as much as we can, do so, and really think about what works for that community and not just make assumptions, but actually get information on how to do that. So I think I'll leave it there because I'm going to talk too much. But meeting people, I'm just going to repeat that from the PowerPoint. Meeting people where they're at, meeting communities where they're at, and understanding and being really honest and open about their concerns. I think particularly now going into the next period, right? We get some of these local and level concerns we're going to get. Having honest conversations up front about those concerns are going to be absolutely imperative before you ever even get into the nuts and bolts of which policy, right, that kind of thing.
Another thing we found in working in communities is that the timeline can be much too long. So if you're doing a planning process that's 20, 25 years out, it's hard to engage community members that have really pressing concerns. So if there are things that you can do to make some of those changes more real time, so whether that's tactical urbanism, we've had projects where we went in and we're talking about a bicycle and pedestrian plan, and we actually map out and create a temporary bike lane so people can use it, experience it, feel it, and then actually contribute back to the longer term plan based on their real-time experience. So that's just another thing we found. So we are getting close to time, but I do want to ask Randall one last question. So we've talked about the need for really integrated solutions, and you mentioned a number of steps the state is taking. I think the Transformative Climate Communities grant is a great example of cutting across all these different sectors, looking at transportation and energy and urban greening. What's next? What can we do to further break down silos and really encourage local governments, or make it easier for local governments to come in with their most innovative, creative, integrated projects?
I think I'm loud. A great question. So I'll start with the program that I mentioned, which the governor certainly intends to expand further. If we can extend cap and trade, and I would sort of directly encourage all of you, certainly our local government partners, to partner with state agencies on such programs. That's directly through the application process and working through how projects come together. Second, this past year, we did launch a bit of a pilot program for technical assistance. And this is technical assistance. It started just with our Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, but now we are deploying it across all of our climate investments. the way that we are deploying that assistance is not just through folks employed by the state, but working with third parties like LGC, like local governments, like community-based organizations throughout the state to sort of train the trainers, teach leaders locally how to not just apply for our state programs through our state processes, but develop other projects in other integrated ways that can in turn reduce greenhouse gas emissions and achieve our other benefits. So this is another, I think, really key opportunity to create leaders, develop capacity at the local level, and do so with state experts regionally. We've got a regional model that will work through deploying actually this summer and fall. I know there's legislation that's being considered right now that would actually establish climate assistance centers and build upon a technical assistance model, again, regionally, really focused in on building local and regional capacity. So I think it's going to take much more than what can happen at the state level. We certainly recognize that, and we want to put more resources in the hands of folks at the local level, but say directly that we want to partner with you. We need to work together, and we need to provide the funds to do that. So I'm hoping we can see more of that moving ahead.
Great, well I think that's a great comment to end on, and I'm sorry there are a lot of great questions that I wasn't able to get to, but I do want to honor our time here, and you guys have, I think, a half an hour for the break, so please use that time if you didn't get your question asked to come up and ask it of our speakers. So join me in thanking all of our speakers.